both pretty typical mechanisms of injury for ACL, so that's kind of how the injury happens. So, both non-contact, changing direction, that's how you typically see those ACLs. About 70 to 80% of ACLs kind of injuries occur that way. Unfortunately, we all sort of saw at the time it looked pretty bad, and scans have confirmed that they've both suffered ACL injuries. So they'll undergo reconstructive surgery and be looking at least 6 to 9 months on the sideline.
Okay, you may have answered the question there, but cause once we hear ACL injury, we just put lines through. But are there a degree when it comes to ACL? Like, is there any chance of either of these players coming back because one might be a little bit better than the other type thing?
Yeah, so partial ACL tears are actually quite rare. Because of the traumatic nature in which the injury occurs, it's usually those big sort of explosive steps that there does tend to be a full rupture pretty much every time. There has been some growing evidence. It hasn't sort of crossed into the NRL too much yet of guys sort of foregoing surgery and trying just a rehab route and coming back in sort of 10 to 12 weeks. We saw recently with Matt Lodge, he did thankfully suffer a partial tear in the pre-season, was able to come back after that 10 to 12 weeks. And Peter Wallace played for a season and a bit without an ACL. So it is possible, but I'd say certainly as it is at the moment, probably 9 times out of 10, you're looking at needing that reconstructive surgery.
I play with a bloke named Alan McAdoe. He played without ACLs as well. The fields. A lot was said about the footy fields and their condition, and do they have something to do with injuries?
Look, absolutely the surface can have something to do with injuries. It's probably a bit of the opposite to what most people think. People see sort of the ground giving and sliding and they think that's kind of the main contributor. But the research shows that the stickier or the harder the surface is and the better friction there is between the boot and the surface, the risk of injury increases in those cases. Look, in these cases, as I said at the start, they were both very typical for the way that ACL injuries occur. So I certainly didn't look at it and go, oh my God, like the field has contributed a lot there. They were both, look, Radley was wrong-footed, stuck his foot in the turf. That's pretty typical. And then Verrills, a big step. We saw Cameron King in the pre-season, pretty much a mirror image. That's how he did his as well. So while the turf can contribute, it is only a small contributor. So it certainly wasn't something that we were looking at going, that's really quite bad.
I was concerned with the break that the players had coming back post-COVID, that they may have some troubles with injuries, being only the shortened pre-season there. Now, I know we can't stop ACLs or MCL injuries. It's a contact sport and we run into them, but I was concerned about players having soft tissue injuries. Now, we've seen Tommy Turbo go down. He's got a history of hamstring injury, so we can't really link that. Has there been much of a link between the break and players coming back and suffering soft tissue injuries?
Yeah, look, Paul, there absolutely has. Look, the in-game injuries probably haven't been too bad. They've been pretty on par, but there's been an increase in those training injuries. So we saw the likes of Andrew Fafita, Ken Mamalo, Lachlan Fitzgibbon. There's been a few players who've suffered like injuries in training, which, while that does happen during the season, it's been quite a considerable increase. And we've seen that in sporting leagues across the world. There's been some soccer sort of competitions come back and seen similar increases. And that was pretty inevitable with the rapid increase that the players had to undertake to go from sort of isolation training back to NRL gameplay within 3 weeks.
Would that be an indication that players didn't do the work in the break? Now, you look at some clubs, the Roosters at the top of that, they don't seem to have a lot of these injuries happening as far as soft tissue injuries go. But would that be players who haven't done a lot of work throughout the break, now they've come back and the load's increased?
Sports science definitely plays a role, and so like I'm sure a lot of the clubs would have put in place, programs that players were to undertake while they were in isolation. But as you know, being a player, some players are more committed to those programs and to training than others. So it was definitely something I was sort of saying while the break was on, is that when the game comes back, it kind of will separate the good trainers from the bad a little bit, in that if they were a little bit lazy or didn't quite do what they were supposed to do, that injury risk was going to be through the roof.
Okay, well, Brien, Seeney, you are an absolute star. We appreciate it so much. I don't think we told you that we don't pay, but we'd love to have you on the show more often when there are more injuries.
I need to see some paperwork first, mate.
Send through your
Twitter
graduation.
doesn't cover, bro.
No, I need to see
Absolutely.
him. I'm going for every part of my body. No, well done.
I will have to charge for that still.
No, we appreciate it. You speak in layman's terms and you make it really easy to understand. So thank you very much. Great stuff.
I do have a problem, though. I
guys.
closed my eyes for a second there. I thought it was Daly Cherry Evans. Does he sound like Daly Cherry
A little
Evans?
bit.
Before